As I was studying the other day, I came across a interesting section as I was reading that I'd like to quote and then place into context in relation to how we're in fact walking as Destonians within the destiny process of the destiny of Anna's existence. And this is the starting point of each and every Destonian walking this process. We're walking it within the context of Anna's realization that existence is in fact ourselves, meaning we've, through our individual processes that we have practically walked in and through writing, self-forgiveness, speaking, sharing and expressing, seeing, realized and understood for ourselves the extent to which we in fact manipulate, control, deceive within dishonesty, interest, greed, survival in this world and this reality toward ourselves, toward others, and how we've been forced and subdued and enslaved into and as such an accepted and allowed self-existence through time, enculturation, external environmental systems, the world system, and just the basic total context of who we are, how we live and behave, and who we are in and live and behave in relation to others, the environment, the animals, nature, the world, societies, countries, the globe, cultures, religions. The extent of diversity that exists within this world and our relationship to each and every single part of and as that diversity is simply an external representation of the extent of separation that exists within and as ourselves, as the mind in relation to our personalities, our reactions, our self-definitions. And within and out of this process, we are asserting ourselves in our living within who we are. Within who we are, meaning assisting and supporting ourselves to become the self-directive principle of how we live within and as every moment of breath. Because even if you, for example, now have a look within yourself, within your breathing, within how you live within, during and throughout one's day, is in a complete alternate consciousness mind reality where one is not at all aware of one's breathing, of one's physical, of one's movement, of one's walking, of one's actual interaction with other people, with the environment, with what is in fact living here with self in and as this physical reality, because we are completely preoccupied in and as isolation within our mind and our personal world. In our mind, from the perspective of energy, as constant, continuous thoughts, backchat, internal conversations, and then from an external personal world environment, money. And we're in the process of walking ourselves into and as physical practical living, which means that we're starting to expand ourselves within ourselves in our personal worlds, that we walk out and step out of this tunnel vision existence of energy as consciousness and money as survival, greed and interest, and kind of stepping back and out of that to start having a look at what is in fact existing here as self, within ourselves, within other beings as ourselves, within our environment, within this physical world, within what is happening in this world and this existence as a whole, because we've been so separated from reality that with us, for example, proposing a practical solution of an equality and oneness, that each individual human being takes self-responsibility for self in asserting and directing oneself and one's living within a context of what's best for all, equal and one, and we all stand together within that basic principle of what is and will be best for all within who we are in our living, and then without, for example, what we're proposing with the basic income grant and equal money, to establish a world of equality and oneness, that such a point is actually fought with or resisted, because within one's mind, what has in fact happened is that one's reality has been so limited and so isolated that beings in fact cannot see a greater picture, or even beyond or through the veil that has been placed over our eyes as energy and money. So within this process, it's assisting and supporting self to step out of that tunnel vision and isolation of separation of self as energy and money in terms of our relationship with and towards it, and expand oneself and one's relationships within oneself and one's world and one's reality to encompass others, the environment, nature, the animal kingdom, and the world as a whole, and to see, realize, and understand that in just stepping out of that accepted and allowed isolation and how we've defined ourselves to and towards energy and money, just walking out of that self-definition within self, within one's mind consciousness system, and all the relationships of reactions and energy in relation to and towards it, one starts seeing, realizing, and understanding the actual practical reality simplicity of what it would mean to change self and to stand up for a system that can benefit and contribute to the well-being of existence and the world as a whole. And this is essentially what we are in fact walking within this process as Destonians. We're walking as the destiny of ourselves as existence. And it is most certainly not far-fetched. It is a practical, physical reality point that can and will be made real by us, ourselves as beings, starting with ourselves. So, in getting back to the point that I came across while I was studying and reading, were interesting words that, as I was reading it, it made me look at how it is that we're in fact walking as Destonians. And it is in relation to Carl Rogers' person-centered or people-centered approach theory, which is another dimension that he proposes within his theory in human beings, in essence, becoming or being self-willed and self-empowered and self-directed and self-motivated, and where trust is in fact placed within them, the power is in fact placed within the person, and so the will and the responsibility and the motivation that is, or that Carl Rogers initially perceived to be inherently there, that simply needs to be facilitated to be able to come forth or step forth into being, where the being thus realized this inherent tendencies within themselves as personal power, self-will, self-directed change, with the power being in the person. And this is essentially how we're walking practically within and as Destiny, with the Destiny tools such as self-forgiveness, writing, self-corrective application. Obviously, the point with regards to being self-willed, self-motivated, self-empowered, self-directed, it is something that requires to be cultivated within self, meaning for most human beings such attributes or parts within and ourselves is not natural, or if it is mostly directed or channeled towards the mind or money, where one's total self-application or self-living, such as self-empowerment, self-corrective principle, self-directive expression, self-discipline, self-motivation and things like that, is being channeled within the starting point of energy towards like pushing and forcing self to assert oneself in, for example, business or relationships or family or the future or sports or things like that, which is basically only limiting one's abilities and capabilities to and as one's personal world only. What we're suggesting is taking, for example, such attributes as self-will, self-discipline, self-motivation, self-empowerment, self-directive principle, and asserting it within and as one's living within all aspects of one's life, where self becomes living motivation, where self becomes a living directive principle, where self becomes responsibility, where self becomes discipline, and those words as self becomes a living word as self that then is expressed equally as one in all facets of one's life, not just centralized or channeled or separated or categorized within only certain aspects within and as one's life or one's living. And then furthermore, essentially what we're also walking within Destiny, as Destonians, as the destiny of existence, as the universe of and as ourselves, is each one standing as a self-leader, meaning you in fact become the leader of yourself and your own world. And what we're furthermore saying is that we all become and stand equal and one within that point of self-leadership, where we stand equal and one with the ability and capacity to take responsibility, to be responsible for ourselves, our actions, our thoughts, words, and deeds. Be responsible meaning to assert ourselves and our living in accordance to a principle of what's best for all, equal and one, where we know that our living within ourselves and towards others and the world and the environment, nature, and the animal kingdom will be equal and one, that we will consider and regard ourselves and each other equally as one. And obviously to assist and support ourselves to become such living beings as living words of responsibility, will, motivation, discipline, power, directive principle, takes time, practice, and application. And with Destiny we have the tools, which is your process of self-forgiveness, writing, and self-corrective application, where you in fact walk a self-practical process of changing self within oneself and one's living. That you, for example, take what it is that you're good at, like for example discipline, will, motivation, directive principle, self-empowerment, being directive, solving situations, and taking one point at a time and asserting such points within self and self's world and self's living in such a way that it can contribute into all facets of one's life. So that, for example, discipline is not only defined in relation to cleaning one's room, for example, but that one changes one's discipline into disciplining oneself and one's living to be and consider others within one's world and one's reality. In, for example, let's say one have weaknesses that one's accepting and allowing within oneself and one's world and one's reality, like laziness in some aspects of getting up in the mornings, for example, and utilize that one aspect of discipline that you see that you have and cultivate it into a living word as self, where self live discipline in all facets of one's life, in work, in one's relationships, in one's self-application, in how you live, in how you look after yourself, in how you communicate and interact with people. Then we'll take the next word, for example, self-directed principle, where you direct yourself, where you make sure that you move, that you expand in your constant self-movement of, for example, writing, interacting with people, checking your reactions. Where are you speaking from? Are you considering yourself and the other in this moment? Are you actually communicating with a person, or are you just talking away in your mind? And so you're becoming living words as self in expanding one's world from mind and money to equality and oneness in all facets of one's world, internally and externally. And so you start seeing, realizing, and understanding that there's more to self, others, and the world than just thoughts and money. And one see, realize, and understand the extent to which one's isolated and separated oneself within and as those 2 points of and as one's internal and external realities. Obviously, we're saying in terms of, for example, living in the system, in this world system as it exists now, you've got to obviously how we've created the world system with regards to our relationship to and as money. We're not saying stop using money or get out of the system or attack the system or revolt or reject or resist. It's not going to change anything. When I'm speaking about one's relationship with money in terms of one's relationship with mind as energy within and money without, it's how we have constructed our internal self-experience in relation to the mind within and money without. And when one's walk one's process through writing, self-forgiveness, and self-corrective application, and start investigating, exploring, and laying out one's experience in relation to the mind of thoughts and reactions, and one's experience to one's external reality, and the extent to which money, in fact, influence, determine, and control who we are, one's world will start slowly but surely expanding and opening up to seeing the extent to which we've in fact separated and isolated ourselves from ourselves, others, and the world as a whole because of these 2 points, the mind and money. So within one's process, it's to assist and support oneself within self-honesty and really investigate how one is accepting and allowing oneself to be controlled, determined, and influenced by thoughts, reactions within, and money without. I mean, you can simply sit down and write it out for yourself. That's where it starts. Write out, for example, your relationship towards money, how money make you feel, how you see money, how you work with money, and why you see money that way, why you work with money that way. How does money determine how you dress? How does money determine your relationships? How does money determine how you live? What would change if you had enough? And then you'll start seeing and opening up like how much you are, how you are, and what and how you live and behave because of money. And then you can go and walk your internal process of investigating your thoughts, how much you actually think. When you're speaking with someone, how much you're actually backchatting in your mind, having internal conversations while speaking to another person. And then you realize that what you're saying to this person is actually everything fake and deceptive, because the real truth of what you're experiencing towards this person is going on in your head. And then you'll start opening up the nature of relationships that's existing in your world, and how much your thoughts, your back chat, your reactions is in fact influencing how you experience yourself and other people. And then obviously the solutions in terms of asserting one's living to assisting and supporting oneself to become the directive principle in one's world, where one, for example, stop thoughts, stop reactions, start applying breathing, and starting to interact with one's world and one's reality in breath, here in the moment, through stopping thoughts and actually speaking and listening and hearing what's going on here in the moment of physical interaction. Not interacting through the mind, but actually in the physical. Like in your breathing, listening to what people are saying, observing people, observing yourself in physical reality, in the moment. How you're moving, how you're behaving, what's really going on with your interaction. And so you'll start within self-awareness, start changing your application and your living in your world. And with money, for example, obviously at the moment, immediately with regards to money, we cannot do anything as yet. We're going to need a whole lot of human beings standing together in realizing what money has become in this world for ourselves and humanity as a whole. And that from a structural, practical, physical living perspective, to change this world and this reality in how we function, it's going to be money. And the solution for that we're proposing is equal money through the basic income grant as the stepping stone towards equal money. And a basic income grant that can be implemented within all countries across the world. And so as you start working your self process within yourself and start standing up for a solution to humanity as a whole, you'll see how practical, simple, direct here this in fact is, and that anything or anyone that's fighting or resisting is simply because of the isolation and separation into and as the limitations of a mind consciousness system, that a simple practical physical solution for self and humanity as a whole cannot be conceived unless one actually just take a moment, step back, and look at the practical reality of what we are presenting. So we suggest taking a moment and really look at what it is that we're saying and showing. And for a moment, stop the thoughts, stop the reactions while you're listening, while you're reading, while you're watching, as the beings are standing up and showing and expanding themselves and their worlds and their realities, to assist and support self to get out of that isolation and that limitation, and to see existence that is right here within breath, within the physical, and that the practical solution to self in the world is in fact here as self. And yes, it's going to take time, application, patience to change self, to change this world, but it can be done, and it will be done through starting with self, in breath, walking this process step by step, breath by breath, to get this done. As Destonians, we're walking as self-leaders to become leaders of ourselves, of our living, of the world as a whole, to become an example of self-leadership, meaning taking responsibility, directive principle for oneself, one's living, one's world, one's reality, and within that responsibility, having the power to change and direct oneself and one's world and one's reality to what is best for all, equal and one. Join us. Thank you.